on my computer, so everything works good. And on my computer, so everything works good.
Oh, I have to mute my other thing now that we're live streaming. Whoops. Okay. All right, so I'm going to let people just keep streaming in for a couple more minutes to the Zoom side of things over here for those of you watching in YouTube land. And I'll introduce our speakers in just a minute. So everybody, as you come in, we'll make sure that you're muted, kind of review what our process is going to be for today's lecture, which is from 11 to 12:30. And I thank everybody for coming and participating. It's very, very exciting. Hope everybody likes my loud and proud red Cal U background. All right. All right. Okay. Okay. Just to remind everyone, we're just waiting a couple more minutes to let everybody get on here. And we'll get started in just a minute with our two speakers for our Research in Real Life series. Okay. Okay. All right, everyone, we're just waiting a couple more minutes before we get started. We'll do introductions. We'll kind of review how things are going to go for today. Really excited to have so many of you here. You know, this is the moment to use the facilities, get a snack, get a beverage, prepare yourselves for some, what do I want to say? Like great dialogue, amazing speakers who are really gonna, I think, bring something unique to Cal U that we haven't had yet, at least not this academic year in terms of a content. So I think Alicia's here. So I'm gonna just introduce what we're doing today, and then I'm gonna allow each speaker to introduce themselves. I'm Ozzy Block. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Research here at Cal U. I'm really excited to have with me Divya and Alicia, who are both people involved in the art scene here in southwestern Pennsylvania. I'm going to say Pittsburgh specifically, but I'm going to say there's a regional push and even beyond. And I'm lucky enough to know both of these individuals personally, and it's really a pleasure to have both of them coming to speak on behalf of Research in Real Life, which is this lecture series. And this is a series where we're really focused on connecting students to ideas about what research can look like in their real life, in their careers. And so Divya and Alicia, I'm going to give you both a moment to introduce yourselves, and you'll hear some dings, dingies, dingers as people come into the room. And then I might just shut off the room so that we just have people watching on YouTube. So Divya, would you like to start with introducing yourself?
Actually, I think Alicia was going to start and then go to her visuals. I think so. You're going to start? You want me to start?
We can just do like short introductions and
then I'll start.
Yeah,
sure.
That sounds good.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, Ozzy. I want to thank you and Cal U for inviting me to be here today. And I'm honored to be speaking alongside Alicia Wormsley. My name is Divya Rao Heffley, and I'm the Associate Director for the Office of Public Art in Pittsburgh, which you will hear a little bit more about later. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm Alicia Wormsley. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, cultural producer, and I am from Pittsburgh. Ozzy, can I call you Ozzy or like Professor Block? Is that?
I mean, let's be real about this. This is real life, Alicia. I am Ozzy. So
Ozzy
yes,
and I went to high school together, actually. So
we did.
So it's awesome to be here and talk to my good friend Divya, who I've been working with for about 4 years
yeah
now, and talk to you about some work that We've been doing separately and together, and kind of like rope it into research and this idea of an archive. Yeah, so what we'll do, how we're gonna kind of break down today, I just finished teaching a class, by the way. I teach at Carnegie Mellon for the School of Art. So, um, so I'm just like transitioning worlds. So bear with me.
This is real life.
Real life, Zoom worlds. How, in what other world could you go from teaching a class in one place to speaking in a completely different place?
In 10 minutes. Yeah.
Right, in 10 minutes. So that's kind of amazing of where we are right now in our socialized world. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about my work. Divya is going to talk a little bit about her work. Then we're going to talk about some work we've done together, and you know, kind of like keep it flowing, open, and then we will have a Q&A. So, you know, feel free to utilize the chat, right? We'll get to it at the Q&A part of the session. And yeah, so I'm just gonna get started, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I love I'm all in on the informality aspect of all of this because I feel like, you know, one thing about Zoom is that like it can feel super formal. And everybody who's in the Zoom world, please post your questions, like Alicia said, in the chat. We will get to them at the end. We're going to let their presentation flow because I think there's a lot of the work, there's connections into the work and how they're going to talk about the narrative that they're discussing for this first hour. So just if you have a question and it's burning, mark it in the chat and I will help to facilitate that at the end of the talk. Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen and let's see. I'm going to try to share my screen. Hold on. Make sure I'm in the right place. Okay, here we go. Making moves. All right. So I'm going to talk about just a little bit about like my practice, how I came to being an artist, very briefly. I studied anthropology. I actually have a master's in anthropology that I got in. I did like a 5-year undergrad program at Berkeley, so undergrad to grad program. So I like came out of college like with a master's degree at like 22 years old. So that's interesting also just in this space, what kind of freedom that gave me in a certain sense in the arts and in my practice. But I was really focused on public art. I was focused on kind of the existence, like Blackness, really like in how that comes through in all of these different spaces that are systemically framed by whiteness, right? So, so I also am like super into sci-fi and really like, I mean, X-Men, Dune, you know, Octavia Butler, like these are all my favorite things. And so like as a young person, I was really like kind of like melding this world of anthropology and sci-fi together. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong button. Oh, there we go. I'm gonna go back. Sorry. I don't know how to use this. So one anthropologist in particular that really inspired everything that I do to date is Zora Neale Hurston. And she wrote this book. This book, Sanctified Church, is a series of essays around some studies that she did. Zora Neale Hurston was an anthropologist. She was a playwright. She was an artist. She was, you know, an activist. She was kind of everything. And she did a series of studies in the rural South in sacred spaces. So like house churches, and this was in like the 1920s and 30s. So it's like post-emancipation, but, you know, like still in this like kind of sharecropping era, pre-Jim Crow, just, you know, she would go to these religious spaces, like a lot of house churches, and she would record when people would speak in tongues. And so speaking in tongues is speaking, you know, in a heightened religious experience or heightened spiritual experience, you speak a language that you don't know. So in a lot of those recordings, she found traces of African dialect. So this is like pretty phenomenal. So in, you know, this is post-emancipation. So this is after 400 years of the Atlantic slave trade, where, you know, Africans in America were not allowed, they were forbidden to speak their own language and practice their own spirituality, that there would be these traces of their diet, of like their ancestral speech in their consciousness. And so for me, that is like huge. That is X-Men. That is like, that is sci-fi, like in the real world, it's sci-reality, right? So I was just really amazed by that. So I started looking for that in the work that I was doing. And it kind of transferred into, you know, my practice of anthropology started to be assimilated into making. Like I've always been a maker. I always practiced, you know, always had an art practice. In anthropology, you know, in school, I minored in photography. So, and I thought of it as like a tool of documenting like some of the things I was working through in anthropology, but it became more of, it started to take over in a way. And then I was like creating spaces, thinking about like recreating spaces through time, just in the way that Zora Neale Hurston kind of expanded time. She broke all the rules of time with this study of like, this person in this particular time has connection, has access to something from a completely different time, right? With this language. So just even in that, those layers are really important to me. And so I started to look for those things and then try to create representations of them. And so, you know, so I like here, just in like some of the work that I've done in installation, I keep thinking that that is the way to do it, but it's not. And also performance. I collaborate often with a lot of performing artists. In particular, the woman in the center of this image is Lisa Harris from Houston, Texas, who is a opera singer, sound artist, filmmaker, brilliant person. And she and I have collaborated for a very long time on doing projects, traveling around the world, kind of finding these layers that I was talking about, these layers that break time. This is an image from a project that I'm going to talk about. The people are the light, and there are Black people in the future. It kind of, I have an arching work called Children of Nan, where all of my projects come out of. And Children of Nan is an archive. I describe it as an archive that that starts from my body. You know, in just in the way that Zora Neale Hurston, like coming from that school, I have like come to the conclusion through my research and my archive that the body is the highest form of technology. It is like the most accurate archive there is. And so Children of Nan is kind of this archive of the Black woman's experience and existence through time. Okay. I do a lot of work in Homewood, which is a neighborhood in Pittsburgh that I grew up in. Um, and I mean, I moved a lot in Pittsburgh, so I lived in a lot of different neighborhoods, but Homewood was one. My mom had ran youth programs in this neighborhood. And so we lived here for a short period of time, but then we were always here, you know, so and this neighborhood is like has this like amazing legacy. And every time I would throughout my like 42 years of life, like every decade it has presented itself differently. And so my like growing up in this space where there's like Black businesses, it's like this, you know, of course there's some survival crime happening, and because of like the outputs of systemic racism, but it's still like this like legacy. There are all of these jazz artists. It's like the first Black opera in America started in Homewood. You know, the you know, Helen Faison, like, you know, completely revolutionized elementary education. Like there are just like all of these gems here, right? Like this legacy. And then it's just like on one side, and on the other side, it's constantly fighting systemic racism. Okay. So now I'm gonna pass the mic to Divya.
Awesome. Thank you, Alicia. So a little bit about my background before I talk about what's on the screen. I also grew up in Pittsburgh, but I immigrated here from India when I was 5. So that definitely impacts my worldview significantly. And growing up, I actually was very interested in scientific research. I thought I would go on and study biology or chemistry or something. And then I discovered this incredible world of art history in my undergrad, and just seeing the way that art and artists have impacted social movement, social change, how art is so integrated with its economic, historic, social, cultural context, grabbed me in a way that nothing else had. So I also very quickly turned to the history of architecture because I was very compelled by the public aspect of architecture, the way that even if you aren't aware of architecture as an art form, it really impacts the way people move through space, whether people feel welcome. It's certainly a critical element in that feeling and creation of place. So after spending a little bit of time in an architecture department of a museum, I went to graduate school and got a master's and PhD in the history of art and architecture. But I focused on architecture really as an element of urban design and the way that our experience of space is molded by the way we move through space, and how the way we move through space is impacted by the architecture around us and the infrastructure, roads, bridges, everything like that. So I spent about 7 years at Carnegie Museum of Art, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But right now, I'm the Associate Director at the Office of Public Art, or OPA, in Pittsburgh. And working at OPA has really allowed me to bring together that deep respect that I have for the way that art, whether that be public art or architecture, really has a critical role to play in how we experience our cities, our suburbs, our spaces. So OPA is actually, it's not part of the city, but it's part of the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council. So we're a private entity that we do often collaborate with the city on various projects. So here you see a couple of screen grabs from our website, which we're very proud of. We just launched it. It's still in soft launch. We're still building it out. But we really believe in the transformative power of art to build community well-being, to promote social connection, and create avenues for intellectual and emotional engagement. So we really see, we hope to create or contribute to a region where the creative practices of artists are really fully engaged to collaboratively shape the public realm and catalyze community-led change. And we build work for this, we build capacity, for this work in a couple of different ways: through technical assistance with clients and developers, through public programming, which includes walking tours and lunch and learns and studio visits. Through artist resources, we have an online artist registry, and we carry out public art training for artists, and through our civically engaged public art projects, which you see a few of there on the right. So in my role at OPA, I work primarily with artists and communities in the area of civically engaged public art, which includes artist residencies in the public realm, as well as temporary public art commissions. And these programs and projects address quite a large range of contemporary issues, with a focus of fostering social justice and cultural equity in public spaces. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Alicia, and I'll speak again in a little bit.
Okay. Let me just, so we're going to talk a little bit, I'm not on mute anymore, right? We're going to talk a little bit about our own, like, how we came to work together. So, I mean, beyond just like the artist-arts administrator relationship, we, you know, there actually was like something, parts of our research that drew us together. And so the way that I think about research is, I mean, I obviously, like, I exist in academia. So, you know, so research, you know, where you're in these spaces, research spaces, you're reading text and all of those things are, you know, great parts of research, but really most of my, like, the real, like, root and strength of my research has been from experience and from field study, right? So, and when I first moved back from Pittsburgh, so I grew up here. I left to go to school when I was 17, right? And then I lived in California and New York City for 15 years. And then I came back in 2012 to, I had to look at the slide, 2012 to, for a residency with the Andy Warhol Museum. So Eric Shiner, who was the head curator at the Andy Warhol Museum, we actually both grew up in Pittsburgh, but didn't meet until we lived in New York, and we became friends. And then when he started working at the Andy Warhol Museum, every time I would visit home, he and I would hang out, and we would talk about, like, things that we could do, projects that could work out, you know, because so much of my practice has to do with working in communities. So I have a studio practice, of course, but the, like, real practice, the real work, you can call it research, field work, whatever, is like with communities, is with other people, is collaborative. So we talked about, you know, creating a project in Homewood, again, because, right, I told you every decade, it's different. The landscape looked different. And so we're thinking about, I also had been doing residencies all over the world, in the country. And one that I was really, that really inspired me was Project Row House. And Project Row House is in Houston, and it's in a neighborhood very similar to Homewood, Third Ward. And an artist, you know, a group of artists basically raised money and got the city to give them a block of row houses that weren't being used. They were, you know, abandoned or blighted, right? And so they started, one side of the row houses, they opened women and children's housing. And the other side, they, you know, gutted these houses, the other side of houses, gutted them, and for artists to create work in, and the work that they, you know, should be collaborative with Third Ward. So I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. I want to do this in Homewood, talking to Eric about it. We, you know, we raised money to start with a residency. And so I come back to Pittsburgh, and I have a studio and a classroom in the high school, middle school, high school in Homewood, Westinghouse. And I work there. I'm making work. I had not 24-hour access, but pretty late. I could be there until 9 p.m. And 2 days a week, students from students would come into my studio classroom and we would work on projects together. At the time, I was working on a bunch of, I was working on these like sci-fi experimental films in Homewood, which I showed you in, here's an image from one of them. And all the kids like wanted to make these like zombie films, which was so, because it was like Walking Dead era. It was like all that stuff was happening. So we started walking around and working on these like experimental sci-fi films, but also the work that I did with the project. I mean, it was very successful. We did all kinds of projects together. And then we were also able to, like, once I finished my residency, I became the creative director of this project, the Homewood Artist Residency, still kind of like umbrellaed by the Andy Warhol Museum so that we could, raise money. And we brought a bunch of other artists in to work on different projects. This is the Westinghouse Wall of Fame. So they have like in the school lobby, they have, and in the Homewood Coliseum, which is like a huge, very important institution in Homewood, they have like the Wall of Fame is like on these like foam boards, you see. And so like the students, I would be like, who's your favorite person on the Wall of Fame? And they're like, what are you talking about? What Wall of Fame? Like they walk through school, they walk into school past this every day and did not look at all of these like photographs with, so I was like, oh, we have to change it. And so we brought Robert Hodge to come, and from Houston, actually, a good friend from Houston, and he worked with a group of students to kind of make a new look for the Westinghouse Wall of Fame. We had Stacy Pearl, who is a local Pittsburgh choreographer, has Pearl Art Studios that she runs with her husband, who's a sound artist, and they have a dance company and in Homewood. And so they did projects we supported. We got the Mayor's Public Art Award. And also it was where I did a project called There Are Black People in the Future. Okay. So I'm going to pass it back to Divya.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. So while Alicia was working on the Homewood Artist Residency, I actually moved back to Pittsburgh in 2011. So just the year before, I guess you came back, Alicia. And I started working as a research associate, interestingly enough, as a title at a museum at Carnegie Museum of Art, developing a program that came to be called the Hillman Photography Initiative, or HPI for short. So HPI was designed to be an incubator for innovative thinking about photography, and it was supposed to push both the boundaries of photography as well as the museum's traditional operating models. So for a year, I did a deep dive into cutting edge research in photography and technology, as well as into how museums typically worked. Now, this was really interesting because, as I mentioned, my graduate work was not in the history of photography, but they specifically wanted somebody to come in who would think very expansively about photography, its impact on space, the way artists use photography. And so it was a really interesting and generative time for me because I was following research in every possible direction that I could go. I created a giant concept map that ended up being like 24 sheets of 8.5 by 11 paper that I taped together because I wanted to convey that it was always changing, dynamic, I was always adding things to it. And that research then led me to benchmark about 30 different museums, photography centers, interdisciplinary art initiatives, just to see how were they talking about photography? Who was doing things that was really pushing boundaries? Photography was exploding everywhere. I mean, 2011 feels like forever ago, but just thinking about how the use of cell phones was just changing the way we're speaking in images. Emojis were changing the way we're speaking in images. We take these things for granted now, and at the same time, how was photographic technology, cameras that allowed you to see around the corner, cameras that people could assemble in their own homes, how is this changing our relationship to images? So then from that benchmarking research, we selected 10 people who I then interviewed with several colleagues over Skype to really get a sense of how are these artists and art professionals thinking about photography and image making, more broadly speaking. By the end of about a year, we came up with a new model for the museum to try out that challenged, on the one hand, the concept of internally driven museum authority, and at the same time, push the museum to think outside of its traditional academic context. So in our model, which is the Hillman Photography Initiative, the theme and programming was not determined by a solo-voiced curator, which is often how many exhibitions are developed, but in collaboration with a group of creative thinkers in photography from outside the museum's walls. It also had an accelerated schedule for programming, which forced us to think about programming outside of traditional museum gallery settings, and really challenge the museum to think differently about its relationships and about its spaces. So for the following 5 years, from about 2013 to 2018, I served as the initiative's program manager, and I supported its development and implementation through 2 cycles of programming during that time. Could you go to the next slide, please, Alicia? Thanks. So I met Alicia during the second cycle of the initiative, which began in 2016 and opened to the public in 2017. So for this cycle of the initiative, our group of creative thinkers in photography came up with a concept called light time, which explored light and time as the essential building blocks of photography, capturing light over time as very basically photography. They, at the same time, over a course of about 6 months of collaborative idea generation, proposed 4 artist-led projects, which you can see across the bottom here, each of which explored photography, light, and time in a different context. So they specifically proposed that we approach Alicia to work on the 4th project, which was about light and social justice, because of all the work that she had been doing as a result of the Homewood Artist Residency, and about her practice, of course. So I'll now pass it back to Alicia to tell you a little bit more about this incredible project that she created out of the initial prompt to explore the connections between photography, light, and social justice.
Okay, so with these prompts that Divya just said, I really, to be honest, just kind of was like, how can I, okay, just like real talk as an artist. Really what I was thinking is, how can I take this museum budget and give it to Homewood, right? So, which is like what you do, like constantly, like when you're doing work in underserved communities, right? You are trying to channel funding to underserved communities, underserved artists, underserved people. So, so I was like, okay, what can I do here? And connecting these, and like also very, I will say, just it's not often that you can feel comfortable to like really be transparent about what you're doing with art administrators, but I felt really comfortable right away with Divya telling her this, like, this is what I want to do, you know. So that's like, that's also like a rare thing. So so I thought about like, how can I create something that, one, supports the community, that's for this community, and not for the museum, not for me as an artist, not for, you know, like, but is serving. And then also I wanted to, you know, channel funding. Like a big part of my practice is like, I've been given a certain amount of support. How can I channel some of that support into other artists, other organizations, other people who are doing the work, just to like make it bigger. I came up with an idea, project that actually Divya came up with the title, The People Are the Light, because I was saying it so much in this conversation. We were talking about light, and I'm like, you know, the people are the light. Like this, like we have to give them a space. We have to like give them access to these spaces to turn on the light, these spaces in Homewood to like shine their light, basically. So I put together a list of artists. I had two cisgendered male artists doing installations, and 10 Black women doing workshops and different performances and things with the work. And all of these people had some sort of connection to Homewood, either like grew up in Homewood, lived in Homewood, worked in Homewood, did work in Homewood, had some sort of, you know, connection to Homewood in some way. And we did like a month-long series called The People Are the Light, where I can do the up and down arrow, where we we gave the artists space to do what they do. So the two installations were Ricardo Robinson, who did kind of this sound piece. He created basically like a shipping container or some kind, it was like a pod that you go in, and it's like a space for reflection and meditation. It was like a quiet space. And it was called Morrow's Hush. And it was in this field, it was in the parking lot of this place called House of Manna. That was like a organization and church run for the benefit of the neighborhood. I mean, the woman who ran the space was like spent most of her day feeding people. The parking lot was like a place of activity because they had like a return to work program, you know, from people who had been incarcerated. They had all of these different programs happening there. So it was like an intense space of like people who are existing, surviving. And so, you know, you could go in this space. The other installation was the Beauty Box, was an old fruit stand on Homewood Ave that had not been used. I mean, it was being used by a gentleman who was selling sweatsuits. And, you know, we talked to him and like worked it out where he sold his sweatsuits kind of on the side. And we brought more people to him and created this space, trying to like get activated with like talks and performances and vendors. And, you know, there were a bunch of different things. And then the workshops. So the reason why I chose 2 men to do these installations was so the 10 women who were holding the workshops would feel safe in these public spaces. You know, because these particular points were you know, intense points in the neighborhood. So we wanted to be in places that were visible for everyone to benefit from it, but we also wanted to make sure that everyone felt safe. So just in the dynamics of the neighborhood, that was the decision that I made. So the workshops were, there was a Black Unicorn Library, Becca Zalanguni. She's a librarian, and she created this collection of Black women, Women X, library writers, collection of books written by Black Women X. And then there was Anquinique Wingfield, who did like a voice workshop of empowerment for Black women to use their voices. Joy Comet did a private healing workshop for women who went through sexual trauma. We had Dina Blackwell, who goes by Free Blackwell, who also runs the organization that ran House of Manna. And so we had Felicia Savage Friedman, who has Yoga Roots on Location, which is a anti-racist yoga school. Ayanna Clark did like a kind of natural beauty cosmetics, but it also really turned into a workshop about like self-love and care. And Nisha Blackwell has an organization where she called Knotsland. It's not an organization. She has a business called Knotsland, and she creates makes bow ties and masks now out of repurposed materials. Yona Harvey is a writer. She in Pittsburgh, well known, who did a restorative writing workshop. We had Ayanna Moore create a public piece in House of Manna lobby. And there were like just a number of workshops, a number of things. I should have been going through these slides while I was saying all this. Things happening just like constantly through these 30 days with this community. And then the part that, so you can see House of Manna, that's the Maros Hush, the meditative space. This is the wall piece that Ayanna Moore did. We had, you know, all of these events, talks, performances. There was a fashion show. And then also, so I organized this, but at the same time, I wanted to make something. And I also really wanted for there to be like a representation of of these people as an archive that was in the museum, because they wouldn't typically be there. Like, it's not necessarily a space. Museums and institutions in general are not particularly spaces for Black bodies. And so I wanted to insert them there in a place where, you know, we felt empowered to do so. And so I made like a kind of artsy documentary about this film and about this project. And I also did like these time travel shoots with all of the participants where they, you know, we kind of just like thought about who they were in the past and who they would be in the future and like melded it together. And then it turned into a book later on. I'll talk about that, but and a film. And here's in the book, this is the essay that Divya wrote about the project. Divya, do you want to jump in?
Just to say that having the book as the way it extends the project, because I remember when you were talking about the book, it was really, how can we share this project? There is a film that was shareable, obviously, but how do we document all of this incredible work and all of your beautiful photographs of these women who had done all of this incredible process and all of their experiences and yours? And so this book is such an incredible document, but I also feel like it's part of the whole process of the project. So it's both an outcome and a critical step, because obviously your work has continued with these so many of the same women, so many of the same ideas. So the many different points that your work now touches so many others is I think just such an incredible testament to your process and practice.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, well, also too, I should say that this book wasn't a part of the Hillman Photography Initiative. Like, this was something that I, you know, just felt like it needed to be. So here's the thing, when you do public work, it's temporal, right? It's a moment in time. And there's no way that I can really share like the experiences that happened during those workshops that were transformative for me. You know, I don't want to speak for others, but like so many things happened, like, you know, just experiences that Ricardo had, you know, with people who went into Maros Hush, the experiences of the people who like checked out books from Becca Zala, like the way that she talks about the project, the way that, you know, every single person talks about, like, has a memory of this project, like, and what it's done for them. So I just like really felt like it had to be something that I could give to the Homewood Library, that I could put in these different spaces in Homewood, that would be like, you know, an output of my my own personal technology, right? My own archive. So an artifact, if you will. So that was something that was like just like really important to me. So I had to make it happen. I do want to show everyone the film that I made. I think it's like it just like gives like a very good feeling of what happened. And because it's so hard to really explain, like in this, because it was like something that happened, an experience. So I want to show the film, and then we will talk very briefly about another project, and then we'll do the Q&A. Divya, do you want to say anything else before I play the film?
No, this is great. Thank you.
Okay. I have to stop the share because I didn't press, I didn't click a box to share the film. So hold on. Okay. All right. Computer sound, optimized for video, doing it. All right. So I'm gonna show this. Okay. And that red play is a little worrisome, but we'll see what happens. Just like these areas of Homewood, they aren't abandoned or vacant. They're filled with spirits. I see them everywhere. Memories, past, present, and the future. The hood is filled with light. That's why they want it. We have always kept them out of the dark.
Inhale, arms backs up. Exhale, arms down at our side. Again, inhaling up. Exhale, pull forward, bending our knees and hips. Exhale, exhale. Inhaling up. Inhaling up. Exhale, pull forward, bending. Exhale, arms down at our side. Come to a front and center. Knees slightly bent. Exhale, outwardly rotate. Side. Come to a front and center. Knees slightly bent. Outwardly rotating. Down in a chocolate bar. I am the midnight blue in a licorice stick, and the golden brown in sugar. I am the velvety orange in a peach, and the coppery brown in a pretzel. I am the radiant brassy yellow in popcorn and the gingery brown in a cookie.
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate.
Is not that we are inadequate.
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate.
It is our light. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. We ask it is our light, not our darkness, that makes us bright and fabulous. We ask ourselves who am I to be brilliant, not gorgeous, talented, fabulous. Our child,
who are you not to be?
Does not serve
You are a child of God.
There is nothing. There's
Your
nothing
playing small does not serve the Lord.
There is
nothing enlightening
about
shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure about you.
As children do.
We are all meant to shine
as
children do.
What could be a poem too that comes out of this kind of head-to-toe assessment? And then in the end, we'll close with a sort of compassionate way of seeing ourselves, maybe seeing other people, and how you might leave.
But I like having some that are kind of grayish in the letter, and other times I like having this kind of thing, you know? So I just, I want to know if you think that's too much for
Yeah, and then I'll be feeling self-conscious, and then I'll make that statement, and she'll be like, yeah, I know who I chose.
I got to put them in the mix of these evil times. But the Lord said, fear for the Lord. I better do it. I got to put them in the mix of these evil times. But the Lord said, fear for the Lord.
My eyes are the brilliant flash of blue in a lapis, and the shimmering glow of ebony and onyx. I am black and I am unique.
Everything in the jar have to be physically covered with the honey, or no? No. I mean, I like that, but if it doesn't bother you, it's probably not a big deal. And that is how you make a honey jar. And you can make this for yourself. A lot of people make them to try to get other people. I don't recommend that, but you can do it to make your relationship stronger, spice up your relationship. So honey jars are an easy and quick way to get your conjure on and make the community light. Make them for the things, make them for the things.
There's certain foods that you can eat that'll cleanse your whole system out. And you have to remember to regulate your system. Like when you eat yams, sweet potatoes, and stuff down south, if you start doing things naturally, your body will tell you when something isn't right. Because it's not good for us to be getting this and that and this and that. Colds and flus. But when you flush out, you got to deliver your kidney and your colon. When you flush out your colon, and it flushes out all the fluids, because people don't know that fasts are good for you when they clean out your body and your system, and it gets you in tune with stuff.
Oh yeah, 'cause we're sick of pigs flying. Oh yeah, and we're sick of brothers dying. Oh yeah, so come on people. Oh yeah, join in the struggle. Oh yeah, fight for liberation. Oh yeah, each and every generation. Oh yeah, I say guns, pick up the guns, pick up the guns and put the pigs on the run. Pick up the guns one more time. Guns, pick up the guns.
And just hum wherever you find yourself. I'm gonna start here, just going up and then going down. Let's try it. Can I eat Keep doing yeah, and you smell
a campground.
I want to do something that's focused on Black women and our power. Not power that's based on control or fear, but power that's like of the spirit. It's mystical and nourishing. Power that brings us all together. I guess it's love. Just like these areas of Homewood, they aren't abandoned or vacant. They're filled with spirits. I see them everywhere. Memories, the past, present, and the future. The hood is filled with light. That's why they want it. We have always kept them out of the dark.
belongs to you and should surround you.
Okay, in the purpose of time, I'm gonna keep it moving. That film premiered at the Carnegie Museum about 3, 4, 5 months after the project. I think it was like January of that next year. And and has since been like shown in a number of institutions and spaces, which is kind of why I wanted to make the book. But okay, where are we, Divya? What are we doing now?
Well, I think there's a lot to talk about already, but it would be great to maybe a little intro on There Are Black People in the Future, the billboard, and then the artwork in residence.
Just like a speed.
Yeah, and then we can maybe talk a little bit about that.
12:03. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, back to this image. So again, I was telling you, I don't have to talk about it, but I was making, the People Are the Light happened. And before that, when I first started the Homewood Artist Residency and was in Homewood, like back in Pittsburgh, I told you I was making experimental films, sci-fi films. And one of, all coming from this archive, the Children of Nan archive. And and I call it Children of Nan because Nan is like the most used syllable in African dialects for mother. Okay, so I was making these sci-fi films and they're all kind of in this apocalyptic existence, right? Where I'm thinking about this apocalyptic thing that happens and then we're in this future. Like that's kind of the basis for Children of Nan series, is that this is a retelling. This is a telling of our present existence from the future. And so I'm making these like little shorts, and it was easy because in some areas of Homewood have been neglected and struggling and surviving, that I can make these apocalyptic films and the kids, and then again I'm like making them, so I'm processing that in my own space, in my own brain. And then I'm working with students, like 8th and 9th graders, and they're like, oh, this place is perfect for our zombie film because it looks like an apocalypse. And I'm like, yo, this is our neighborhood, and there are parts of Homewood that look amazing, that are beautiful, and like kept together, but there are parts of Homewood that are struggling, like, and have been neglected by our systems that are not equitable. And so our government systems that are not equitable. So, you know, we're working through that. And I'm also, this is like a little film that the students made about housing. Like why are there, I'm not gonna play it, but why are there, are houses that are falling apart in Homewood not torn down by the city, but in other neighborhoods they are torn down by the city? Why is the upkeep of some neighborhoods different than the upkeep of others? That's my kid. So we are, you know, so we're working through that. And so while, you know, and also I'm showing them these sci-fi films and there's no Black people in them. So even in Hollywood's future, Black people don't exist, and they're fighting to exist. Again, like, it's just like, where can we dream to a better future? Like, how can we create this? So that, and then again, like I told you about, like this legacy of Homewood, you know, that, so I just, and studying anthropology. So I started collecting these objects while the kids were making zombie films. I was like picking up stuff off the street, or like getting things from people, like Hoarder, you know, Hoarder capital, Pittsburgh, Hoarder capital of the world. People were just like giving me bags and boxes of things. They saw me like walking around. They're like, here, I got some stuff. Like, here's a box of dolls, or like some old skis I had in my basement. So I'm like taking all those objects back to my studio and printing "There are Black people in the future" on them. And I got that phrase just from like a rant I was having with my partner, talking about all these things, processing all these things. And then, you know, and then I was like, okay, so I started using that line, and because of like my, like, kind of like spiritual, like my like wanting, like really, like my practice, I feel, is like very ritualistic and spiritual, that this is like, this was a ritual, me like printing "There are Black people in the future" on these objects. And it was like I was like creating this prophecy. I was making this happen as I was doing it. So I made a bunch of stuff with "There are Black people in the future" on it. My partner collected sound pieces that where he created sound, did like field recording and collected sounds from Homewood, and we made these compositions for the objects. We can hear like really quickly. So we did that. I, you know, did this whole work. This is like Afrofuturism. I'm going too far. Afrofuturism, and became a term that just came out in like 2009. Some art critic decided that, you know, gave a name, because in the art world, everything has to be like named. I mean, that's like kind of white supremacy, but it's like this naming system, right? So this thing, this like idea of Black people imagining a future, or like creating like, you know, things that like Sun Ra and Alice Coltrane and Octavia Butler have been doing, you know, that even like W.B. Du Bois was writing sci-fi, and like, this is, you know, like now has a name. It's called Afrofuturism. So then this like "There are Black people in the future" work was written about, and and I moved on. Like I still, you know, showed those things as artists do. Like those objects were shown in galleries and different institutions, blah, blah, blah. And I moved on, and I was doing other work. I was working on "The People Are the Light." I was working on a bunch of different things. And then a colleague, John Rubin, asked me, he has a project called "The Last Billboard," and it's on top of the former Shadow Lounge, which was a very important music and arts venue in East Liberty, which is another historically Black neighborhood that's slightly different than Homewood, where, you know, it's gone through this process of survivalism and all of these things, but now has been completely gentrified, and now is not a Black neighborhood anymore. So, and these people who had been there for generations have been displaced, and it, you know, there's Ace Hotel there. So he wanted to put the text on the billboard. Cool, okay. You know, I was a little worried about like the people who, because the wounds of the Shadow Lounge, which had been outpriced of its neighborhood, it was still there. So I was a little worried about that, but then I was like, no, this is important, put it on the billboard. And then of course there were conversations around this, like with the neighborhood, with different people. But then the developers of that neighborhood, the people who are gentrifying it as we speak, they felt like the text was divisive. And so they demanded that it be taken down. And so it was. And then the shit hit the fan. Basically it became viral. We put statements out. People started protesting, and the city of Pittsburgh, they were getting like the company that owned the building that took the text down was getting like 1,000 calls a day. Like, that is not okay. Like, you can't just remove this text. And then, they said like, oh, you can put it back up, right? After the harm had been done, after this trauma had happened again, because this is also a place where the Shadow Lounge had been. So again, we had community meetings and people told me like, I feel like that billboard, like my family, my grandparents grew up in this neighborhood and now I'm not welcome there. So things have to be done. And then basically I saw the Heinz endowments, the director, president, I don't know what they're called, what he's called, but he used the billboard in a presentation at this huge art summit. And so I was like, oh, well, if he's using this as an example, then they should give us funding to support this work. And so I called the Office of Public Art because I've already been doing projects with them, like on some park designs and things. And I like felt respected by this institution. And I felt like, and then, Divya started working there, and it just like felt like a space where I could get this work done. So I went to them to talk about partnering with me to create this project, where we kind of like fleshed out this program of putting There Are Black People in the Future in residence as a text. And we gave 11 mini grants to artists, activists, makers and shakers in the East End to use this text in their already existing work. And what came from it is pretty amazing. We had just like brilliant, amazing makers doing work around Black creatives, what it is to be a Black creative in Pittsburgh. We had a teenager talking about intersectionality and futurism in their work, and creating like an Afrofuturist album. We had empowerment through voice and Clinique. We had street art, a Black teen storytelling group that turned into like its own thing, like of this Afrofuturist club at the Lighthouse program in the Homewood Y. One of the grantees was our rest doulas, and they work on like revolutionary rest for Black and brown bodies called Black Dream Escape, which is its own just unbelievable thing. Gatherings for Black moms, anti-racist yoga school support, hip hop album. And this, and not only in this project does it have this, and also this like ability to channel funds to other artists, because of like the work that's being done. This billboard has been replicated in Detroit. It's in Kansas City right now. It has been in New York. It is going to be in Houston. We partnering with Project Row House and the Goethe Institute to replicate this project. We just gave 5 mini grants out to Houston artists to use the text in their work. And I'm doing some partnering with the Indigenous Futures Lab in Montreal, and we're doing some dreaming workshops around their Black people in the future, thinking about like the Afro-Indigenous relationships and things like that. So it's just like kind of become this thing that is awesome. And the grant, and it really, like, the grant project was like just really inspired me in ways that I can't even say in words.
So I think it would be great to take some questions, if that's okay with you, Alicia.
Sure.
Though I did just want to, the way that you so beautifully talked about both of your projects just reminded me again of why the title Archives Are Everywhere became the title for today's presentation. It's a phrase that you said when we were talking with Ozzy and Cindy about this presentation. And just so many different ways that you said the body is the archive. You have this incredible archive of objects. There are Black people in the future. The book, The People Are the Light, is an archive. The film is an archive. Your whole oeuvre of artwork is an archive of your practice. And so what's really interesting to me, and maybe we'll have a question about this or we'll talk about it at some point, is the way that your work challenges archives, traditional stereotypical definitions of archives and traditional stereotypical definitions of research, is really one of the most potent and powerful challenges to research as a tool of white supremacy. And the way that you frame your practice is you're just flipping the entire frame on what research is and what it can be. So that's, I guess, more a comment than a question.
I mean, you have to think about it just a perspective, and this is also, like, I had a mentor, Ellen Sebastian Chang, when I was studying anthropology at Berkeley, and you know, because I just found so many things in academia, you know, in my research problematic because of the texts that the sources that were in charge of this information were biased and racist and sexist, and we're coming from like a structure of white supremacy and colonialism and imperialism and violence. And so I'm reading, I'm looking, you know, I'm like learning about different aspects of Black culture, my own culture, through the eyes of someone who is you know, conditioned to think through a hierarchy, right? And so for me, like I had to, you know, one thing I remember, you know, Ellen told me, like, you have to learn how to learn in this society. And so that means, like, we have to look for these, the pieces, the things that aren't, that don't have that bias, that aren't through this gaze. Like, what can you weave through and get to? And usually it's like the personal narrative, right? Usually it's like people sharing their own experiences. And so you just have to, like, get there, right? Like, why is there this middle person? Like, let me just get past this middle person who is putting all of their limitations on this, and get to, like, what is actually happening.
Yeah, that's such a critical step, I think, for me personally, too, in any research that I do, whether it's in the academic context of, you know, solo research in a printed archive or in periodicals or texts or anything beyond into the public realm. It's like, well, who's telling the story? What's their story? What institution is supporting them? What are they using certain words that are red flags? And you're like, wait a second, you know, how can I gather 10 different stories and try to find the truth through personal narrative, through the person who's actually had the experience and who has, despite all odds, often to the contrary, that this person has the power to speak, have their story recorded, and have people listen to the story, which has traditionally and historically been the realm of white men, which is why so much of the canon of so many disciplines is white men talking about white men. And so one of my goals is to kind of dispense with this idea of the canon as an absolute. There is no absolute canon. We have the power to change what the canon is. So I think that especially as I listen to you talk about your work, that's what you're doing. You're just doing it, but I think all of us have that responsibility, if not that call to challenge and really pay attention to what we're researching and how we're doing it.
Right. Absolutely. That was really powerful, what you just said.
Oh, thanks.
So, yeah, should we take some questions, or
Yeah, if folks want to
like low
unmute
on
to ask a
time?
question. Yeah, I was going to say if they want to unmute to ask a question, they can, or they can write it in the chat if they would rather do it that way, but I'll monitor the chat for either thing. I love when you two talk because you just kind of start like bouncing off of each other, and it just gets into like a good, like 7 minutes ago, you were like, we're going to take some questions. And then you just like,
sorry.
Okay with the rest of the 10 minutes going like that too, but I'm all in on if anybody wants to ask a question. Looks like Dr. Persinger unmuted herself. Cindy, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that I'm glad that we came back around to come back to talk about archives again. And I don't really know, like everyone who's listening, how much experience they have with like a traditional archive, to have this sense that you go, like the kinds of things that people in power decided need to be saved, right? Because there are resources that go into keeping these things in the archive, which are precious things, right, saved there. And that you might go to an archive and they'll give you white gloves, right? So that when you touch these precious things and all of this, and like as somebody who studied art history and went to numerous archives, and was able to get funding from institutions to, go off to London for 9 weeks one summer to sit there with, my white gloves on in this space. It's so very different from, Alicia, what you're saying about being in Homewood and like picking stuff up. But that's part, you know what I mean? And people bringing you boxes of things, right? So I guess just sort of that, I just wanted to sort of emphasize that for people, right? I mean, when you were talking about that, that's what really struck me. So I don't.
Yeah.
But more a comment than a question, but.
Right. No, that's real. I mean, and I think about like those kinds of that structure. I guess those are structures or forms where, I created this my own archive from things like, a lot of those things I picked up on the street or found in like abandoned buildings and like or that people just gave me like boxes of like I'm cleaning out my grandmother's basement here, like you want to just come look through this stuff, and like how precious those things are and how precious and it's not because like I made them precious, right? I empowered myself just in the same way that whoever the powers that be say like this is important, we're going to archive this, I empower myself to make my own archive. And then I'm like encasing, like McDonald's French fry wrappers in resin, and then I work with a gallery that sells that for a certain amount of money, and then that's going to be in one of these white gloved spaces. So it's like this weird, it's really interesting how those things work, and how that's why all I can say is like a lot of that stuff is so imaginary. And what really is like the real archive is is like I put power to that object. Through my body, my technology, I put power to these things. And so by like the ritual of printing on them, encasing it in resin, making it an artifact, that's like, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think a really important step in thinking of the larger systems and structures you talked about, Alicia, is how can the art field support more artists in creating their own archive? Because so many artists don't get operational support. They don't get the support to have creative time, to think about where can I go next. It's like project to project to project, which then leads to how do you challenge the structures through which grants are given? How do you make sure that the artists who are making work for social change can be spoken about outside of this idea of the canon and Western aesthetics, which is so pervasive and so damaging? So, I mean, the research comes in so many different ways, you know, and our job as arts administrators and, you know, public arts administrators is challenging those systems so the artists who are already doing it every day don't have to do more of it. You know, how do we lower those barriers? How do we amplify your voices so that it's not a bunch of people in a room who have no idea about your practice and just say, oh, this won't go in a white glove archive, I'm not going to fund it. How do we create the structure so that doesn't happen? So I think that's part of the much bigger ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, just have to like dissolve capitalism and like make
right
a more equitable world. Like that's, you know, like better distribution, no billionaires, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. That's just a couple thoughts.
I want to bring you a question from the chat. I think it's directed at Alicia. The question is from Jada Powell, and she asks, what inspired you to want to start your amazing movement?
There are Black people in the future?
I think she's maybe talking about all of it as a collective, maybe the people are the light and...
My grandparents are a big inspiration to me. Just my grandmothers in particular. I spent a lot of time with all four of my grandparents. I was lucky to have 4 grandparents for a good part of my life. And my grandmothers, you know, kind of like made me really question power dynamics because they were like the most powerful people. They're like these little Black ladies. You know, and they're like, so I'm like, well, you know, like what they're way more powerful than, you know, some like whatever institution director or blah blah blah, and so that really inspired a lot of just like seeing things differently. And then I mean, I've just been really blessed with some pretty amazing, like I talked about Ellen Sebastian Chang, like as a mentor for me, and just I've just been my mom. I've just been like really blessed with like really strong women who make me really question why men are in charge. And so that even just like breaking down that dynamic, like in my mind, like of like what, like how, you know, of power structures and like what that even means. And then, you know, like being a Black person in America, of course, is like, so I think that all of those things combined, and I definitely would say art and has inspired me so much, and writers like Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin and Octavia Butler and Samuel Delaney and Richard Wright and Toni Morrison and just, you know,
I think your feedback loop there, Alicia, where you talk about the first thing that you mentioned was people. And then when you were thinking about more of what your inspiration was, it was more people. And I think it's so telling of who you are as an artist and a person that it's real, you know, it's like the people are the light, and that's where your light comes from, is like from the inspiration of others. And I think that full circle piece, not to be like, I'm ending there because it's 12:30, but kind of a little bit, maybe that's what I'm doing to you. Right. I think it really speaks a lot to who you are and what research can be. That research is not just an outward look, but it's an inward look as well. And I think, what I'm hoping students gain from from being a part of this kind of a lecture, getting to hear somebody like you who they maybe wouldn't have access to normally, and somebody like Divya, is how their life can be impacted by a look inside too. Do either of you guys have any closing words or thoughts you want to share before we wrap things up?
I just want to thank Alicia and thank you for having us. This has been super, so like good for the soul for me, just to think about these things and have an opportunity to talk about them. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Divya.
Yeah, same. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for listening. And that's it.
And this will become a part of the archive too, Alicia. Divya, how about that?
Great.
About that.
Archives.
Spirit of archives. Yes, exactly. This will become a part of the archive. So thank you everyone for participating today. And thank you so much, Divya, Alicia, Cindy, Cal, you for making this happen.